Now we bring in the voice of the New York Mets on SNY, a good friend who really could look at this as a fan and as a colleague, and that is Gary Cohen. Gary, thanks for joining us. How you doing?
I'm good. I'm doing okay, Mike. It's a sad day, but a day to celebrate an extraordinary life.
Let's start with you as a kid growing up as a Met fan. What did Ralph mean to you?
Well, you know, Ralph, along with Bob Murphy and Lindsey Nelson, were the sole three voices of the Mets for the first 17, 18 years of the franchise. They did all the radio, all the TV. And, you know, people remember Ralph mostly because of Kiner's Corner, his quirky post-game show. But he was a terrific nuts and bolts play-by-play guy as well. You know, what distinguished him from his partners was not only that he had played the game and he had vast baseball knowledge, but Lindsey Nelson had kind of a frenetic pace to him, kind of a rat-a-tat announcer, probably more suited for football than it was for baseball, although it played great in the early days of the Mets. And Murph, of course, was, you know, the guy with the Oklahoma drawl and the corny expressions, and Ralph just had such an ease to him, and I think it really is reflective of the kind of person that he was. He's the kind of guy who, when somebody is in a room with him, that person is automatically comfortable, and I think that came through on the air. There was a great comfort to Ralph and a great ease about him, and I think it really spoke about the kind of person that he was.
I mean, that's a great way to put it, Gary, because I was just telling the story when I first heard the news, just because I was a sick Met fan like you, that I heard the stories 50 different times. I mean, every time they went to San Diego, I heard about him being the general manager of the minor league team there and all that. It never got boring. It never got old. Comfortable is the perfect word for it.
I looked forward to Yolo Tango at least once or twice a year.
Now, you grew up as a Met fan listening to him, and then when you take over in '89, you're about to start your 26th season with the Mets as a broadcaster. How were you treated by him? Because we had Keith Hernandez on, and he said he couldn't have been greater to him. He said he could have looked at me as a threat, but he could not have been nicer. Now, you started on the radio side, but how was the interaction with you and Ralph?
It was as good as it could have possibly been. I mean, Ralph had. The thing about when you're somebody like Ralph Kiner and you have been famous from the time you were a teenager. I mean, think about it. He was a great high school player in California. He stepped right into the major leagues and was immediately one of the greatest home run hitters of all time. I mean, he played only 10 years. Had he not had the back problems and, you know, played 5 or 10 more, he would have easily hit 500-plus home runs. He played for the worst team in the majors for a good portion of his career, had nobody behind him in the batting order, and he had won 7 home run titles. Teams could have pitched around him, but he still was able to do that. And he was acknowledged as maybe the greatest home run hitter of his generation. So this is a guy who knew that he had his place and didn't need to prove himself. He was again, as at ease with himself and with people around him as anybody I've ever met. And, you know, that's the way he treated me. And you know, we didn't get to work a whole lot for most of the years that he was working regularly. I filled in a couple of games on TV, and we got to work together. But, you know, most of my experience on the air with Ralph is over the last 8 years with SNY, where he'd come in and do 12 or 15 games a season. And I can't tell you that there was ever a time that he came on where it wasn't the greatest day of the week, those innings that Ralph worked with us. You know, Keith and Ron had enormous respect for him, and I'd even say that, you know, Keith had a reverence for Ralph that Keith doesn't have for very many people, and I think that was really fun to be a part of.
Talking to Gary Cohen, radio voice and now television voice of the New York Mets. Have been with the team for going on 26 years now, and on SNY for quite a long period of time as well. Somebody had sent me a clip, I guess probably going back a few years now, of you asking him about the Liz Taylor situation. And his response, you know, was quite easy. When you ask questions like that, was he cool with you hitting with it extemporaneously, or is that something you'd have to go to him off the air and say, are you comfortable talking about this?
No, we never rehearsed any of it. But again, there was such an ease to the man. You he liked to talk about that stuff. And I'll say this also, because I heard somebody say earlier today, I forgot who it was, that when he worked with McCarver, which was a great pairing, that Ralph was less critical and that worked because Timmy was more critical. But in his later years, as he worked into his 80s and even into his 90s, Ralph could be really pointed in some of the things that he said on the air, and it was wonderful. It was great. It was just he was able to open up and just let it all hang out. And I know he had vocal problems over the last decade, but the content of what he was bringing to the table was still spectacular.
Now, Gary, so many people are talking about the Liz Taylor date. Did you ever ask him off the air, how did the date go, and was there a second date?
There was no second date. He actually told the story on the air about how when he came out from whatever venue, I think they went to an opening of a movie together, and he came out and asked for his car, and all the other people, high-profile people had limousines. He had driven in his own car, and he had to, walk down the block to get the car, and he said that blew any chance of a second date.
But, I was just telling Michael, too, growing up a Met fan in this business, I got more of a kick out of meeting those guys than most of the players. As somebody that was wanting to be a broadcaster your entire life, were you the same way? Were you in awe when you first got to work with Bob Murphy and Ralph Kiner?
Oh, of course. Of course I was. And think about it this way, Don. In losing Ralph Kiner, we've lost one of the very last links to the beginning of this franchise. I mean, think about the towering figures who began with the Mets in 1962, whether it was Mrs. Payson or M. Donald Grant or, Bob and Lindsay or Casey Stengel, George Weiss. I mean, all those people are gone. And Ralph was really the last remaining link to the beginning of the franchise. And for those of us who grew up as fans, broadcasters are the enduring connection. The players come and go, the managers come and go, the general managers come and go, but the announcers are the people that are there year after year and that fans relate to. So I'm right with you. I held those guys in tremendous regard, but I give them all credit. Obviously, I never got to work with Lindsay. I met him a couple of times before he passed away. They were all incredibly gracious.